I ask you this. Which is more likely, that the Eagles return to the Super Bowl or they miss the playoffs entirely? Jason?
Okay, so I'm going to go with they miss the playoffs entirely. And let's remember the question here before everybody blows me up. Let's remember a little bit the question here. Return to the Super Bowl or miss the playoffs entirely. The NFC is stacked this year. And at some point, you have to look at returning odds. Since the year 2000, only 3 teams that won a Super Bowl went back to the Super Bowl the following years. 7 teams since the year 2000 had a losing record. So if I got to put my money one way or the other, in recent history, you look at it and say, okay, I'm looking at the odds, and the odds say you're likely to have a dip in performance. When you stack that with the fact that the NFC is stacked, and you have to look at the fact outside of just the East, you're looking at the Packers, the Vikings, the 49ers. You're looking at a lot of teams that are going to compete for wild card spots. It's not easy to get into the NFC playoff race specifically. So if the choice is Super Bowl or miss completely, the Eagles will miss the playoffs.
I completely disagree. I think that the Eagles are more likely to make the Super Bowl. When did we start putting more weight on the preseason than we did the Super Bowl? Yes, Carson Wentz is injured. Yes, Nick Foles has struggled this preseason, but he's the returning Super Bowl MVP. He'll be able to hold them over. Yeah, if you look at this roster arguably is even better than it was a year ago. They have Jay Ajayi for a whole season. They've added Michael Bennett to the defensive line. There is no way a roster this talented will miss the playoffs.
But at the end of the day, you're talking about an entire roster. When you're talking about the quarterback position, it deserves some level of emphasis. I understand preseason is just preseason, but Nick Foles has looked terrible in the preseason, and we do need to at least acknowledge the fact that at the end of the last regular season, he didn't look good then either. You mentioned a Super Bowl MVP. Larry Brown was the Super Bowl MVP for Will Cain's Cowboys. How did he do when he came over to my Raiders? Not very well. So the MVP doesn't suddenly mean you're going to have sustained success the next year.
I got you here, Fitz. Let me just do this one really quickly. All right, because this is going to be fun.
He called Cowboys fighting words.
Well, no, here's the thing. Look, everybody knows that there's a tiny bit of bias when it comes to the Cowboys with me. But did you? I just want to be clear here. Did you, and you were doing so well along the way, did you really just compare Carson Wentz to Larry Brown? Did you use Larry Brown as an example to cast doubt on Carson Wentz or Nick Foles for that matter? You used Larry Brown as an opportunity to cast doubt on the Eagles quarterback situation?
Absolutely. I think at some point you have to look at the success of the playoffs. And let's remember where we were on radio during the playoffs this year. When the playoffs started, there was a conversation about the Eagles and Nick Foles being a liability. There wasn't trust in Nick Foles. And then he had a magnificent run. I'm not taking anything away from that. But at some point, you can't acknowledge the fact that he's looked so lost during the preseason. We're allowed to say, okay, was the playoff run an aberration?
Look, I was the biggest skeptic of Nick Foles going into the playoffs. I will say that. I was on radio blasting him. And then he came into the playoffs and he performed. He was the Super Bowl MVP. Does that not count for anything? Are we not going to say, hey, you proved it on the biggest stage against possibly the best quarterback in NFL history, and we're not going to give him any credit for that?
Okay, so hold on for a second. First, Fitz, I still can't get over the fact, and I love Larry Brown. This is my Horned Frog Texan. Of course I would. TCU alum. Great guy that caught 2 passes directly thrown to him by Neil O'Donnell to bring home that MVP trophy. But look, man, it's not the same. He switched teams. You just pointed out from the Dallas Cowboys to then what? The Los Angeles Raiders? I can't remember. You guys move around kind of often.
Wow.
The truth of the matter is Nick Foles has earned more respect than what you just gave him. But I do think you're right. I think you have to choose between Super Bowl and playoffs. The best argument you have, and the one you have to answer for, Andrew, I think in the end, is how hard it is. And look, man, you're a former player. You surely recognize this, how hard it is to reclimb that mountain. That's why we spend show after show talking about the New England Patriots and the greatness of Bill Belichick, because exactly how hard it is. And he has the stats. I've got him as well. It's just a rarity for a team to repeat even an appearance in the Super Bowl. If you're taking odds, if you're just taking dice and throwing them out there, and you're in Vegas, the odds are higher you miss the playoffs than make a return trip to the Super Bowl.
I get it 100%. I understand. But listen, this is one of the most talented teams that we've ever seen. And also, the difference is their franchise quarterback didn't get the opportunity to win that big game. So we can all agree that Carson Wentz is at least close to coming back from injury. You can't tell me he's not hungry to go back to he's not the quarterback who won it last year. He got him there, but he didn't taste that victory. He didn't taste that trophy as he was the champion, the hero. He wants that. And as long as they have that, they'll be fine. If Foles can hold them over for a 2 to 3 to 4 game stretch until Carson Wentz comes back, I think this team is just as hungry with Carson Wentz at the helm.
Do you not have to acknowledge, though, how talented the NFC is as a whole? Because we're not just talking about – the question wasn't win the division. Even if the question was win the division, it might be more difficult. But we're also talking about win the division and then beat the Vikings, beat the Packers, beat the Saints, beat whoever. I mean, you're talking about a stacked NFC. This isn't the Patriots walking through a cakewalk of the AFC. There is so much talent in the NFC. You can't tell me clearly that they're a better team than every other team in the NFC.
I'm not arguing that. I'm not arguing the NFC is great. I'm not arguing it's going to be difficult. I'm not arguing they have a bullseye on their back. The question is, what is more likely? They miss the playoffs or make the Super Bowl? Yes, it's an uphill climb to make the Super Bowl, but missing the playoffs with this kind of roster, with a quarterback on the brink of being elite, I don't think it's realistic.